Well, today we are going to talk about the Soviet space program. And I know that's a little crazy, but it can teach us a lot about digital product development. So if you bear with me, we're totally going to get there, and it's going to be a lot of fun along the way. So let's go back in time. We're going to go back to 1968 when two steppe tortoises made history. They were the first Earthlings to ever be sent out into space to go around the moon and be returned safely. The first living beings to go around the moon and come back. This mission was done by the Soviet space program. It was yet another first for the Soviet space program, who is used to being first at everything in space. Now, this was the craft. This is called the Zond 5. And it flew around the moon as planned. Everything went great. But upon re-entry into Earth, things did not go well. Everything went wrong. And instead of landing in Kazakhstan, they had to have an emergency landing in the Indian Ocean. And of course, the Americans heard about this and raced to get there before the Soviets could retrieve the capsule. And they got there first and took pictures. And here are pictures of the Zond 5 splashdown in 1968. Now, the Soviets got their capsule, but the Americans got the pictures, and they looked at these pictures. And as soon as they did, they realized something really important. That Soviet technology was far, far behind American technology in 1968. And the Soviets were no threat to beat the Americans to the moon. Just 3 months later, the Americans launched Apollo 8 with human beings on board around the moon and back. And once that happened, the USSR abandoned all attempts to reach the moon before the Americans. So the question is simple. If you're first to everything, but don't get to the main goal first, what happened? What went wrong? What went wrong? And what I want to talk about today is the Soviet space program, how it went about what it went about, but also how similar it is to what we're doing today, developing digital products. See, it doesn't seem like these things would fit or be the same, but they really are. You have the Soviet space program and modern digital product development. They're both high-tech, high engineering. They both have a distinct design component. They're huge fields that just burst into being and captivate entire populations and economies. I mean, the internet as we know it grew from the space race. And they both involve activities of making that have a broader context. For the space race, it's geopolitics, but for developing digital products, it's the market, it's the vagaries of corporate initiatives. Now, to understand all this stuff, I'm going to have to go backwards even further and talk about the space race itself, because I know there's going to be a lot of young people here who might not remember all this stuff as much as some of us older, right? I'm Gen X, not that old, but you get the idea. So let's go back in time. And we're going to go back to the end of World War II. Now, the Soviet Union reaches Germany first, and they capture a ton of German rocket technology, specifically the V2 rocket, right? And they immediately see the promise of the rocket as a warfare game changer. And later, as the Soviet Union develops nuclear capability, they're putting nuclear warheads on top of ever increasingly bigger and better rockets. And they create ICBMs, intercontinental ballistic missiles, right? Amazing brute strength of warfare. And this leads to something called the Cold War. Because by 1950, both the Americans and the Soviet Union, they have so many nuclear weapons that they could destroy the other side utterly many times over. And this thing comes about, this concept comes about, it's called MAD. It's called Mutual Assured Destruction. You basically have the Americans and the Soviets arguing over the entire planet. Now, neither side wanted all-out destructive conflict. That's crazy. That's mad, right? So we settled into conflict by nearly every other means. political, scientific, athletic, territorial, weaponry, and of course, space. So the Soviet Union takes this huge advantage in rocket technology and they build this fast-moving space program. The space race is born because neither side wanted the other to be the first to exploit space for military purposes. The game's afoot, and the end goal is obvious. It's the big goal. It's the moon, the pinnacle achievement for humanity, the ultimate winner-take-all prize. Get to the moon. And in 1957, the Soviet Union launches Sputnik 1. They strike first in this space race. And it's no exaggeration to say for Americans, in 1957, 12 years after the end of World War II, Sputnik 1 overhead, it freaked us out, right? It woke us up because we feel vulnerable to spy satellites that are right above us. And we fear the weaponization of space. Now, the Soviet Union moves very fast in the space race, and they become first at everything, In fact, the Soviet space program array of firsts is truly deeply impressive. First crewed space flight, first animals to orbit the Earth, first person in space, first person to orbit the Earth, first flyby of the moon, first photograph of the dark side of the moon, first flyby of another planet, first woman in space, first spacewalk, first landing on another world. You get the idea. Now, the Americans were always just behind. They couldn't quite catch up. They couldn't quite get these things done faster than the Soviet Union. And the Soviets took every opportunity with propaganda to say, we are number one. We did it. We're the best. It was very important back then. But we sort of all know the end of the story, right? The United States, through NASA, was the first to get to the moon, to land humans on the moon, spurred on by these impassioned political speeches. Americans fall behind early. By 1968, seeing those pictures of Zond 5, the Americans are like, wow, we figured out what we knew all along. We are actually really way ahead. And in 1969, boom, the US wins the space race, landing on the moon first. So, what happened? What happened? That's my question. Why, if you're first to everything, could you miss the big thing? So what we're going to do today is talk a little bit about that. We're going to talk about why the Soviets didn't reach the moon first. And along the way, we're going to see some really interesting parallels to stuff we do all day, every day. And there are some cautionary tales here for us. And I'm just going to share a few. So we're going to look at this through the lens of a lot of beautiful Soviet propaganda, space propaganda artwork. This is beautiful stuff. And we're going to start by discussing this thing called speed, the need for speed. And the USSR was serious about being first. They threw everything into this effort. They bulldogged it. They bootstrapped it. They were working under unconscionable time pressure. They could barely test anything prior to launch. Dates, artificial dates, relentlessly drove process, goals, methods, quality, pushed down. First is everything. To wit, the very first human to walk in space. This is 1965, and you're looking at a real shot of Alexei Leonov, who exited the Voskhod 2 and performed humanity's first spacewalk, 1965. The Soviets really wanted to be first to this one. This is a big one, right? And they cut some rather alarming corners to make it happen. So let's talk about the Voskhod 2. Now, really, Voskhod 2 was just sort of like a souped-up version of the Voskhod 1, and it's created expressly for the purpose of the spacewalk attempt, for no other reason. Now, in order to change the old Voskhod 1 rocket, the Voskhod 2 for the spacewalk, a few things occurred. One, the ejection seat is removed. The crew module could not be open to space because it still used vacuum tube technology. So they had to create an untested inflatable airlock. There's no provision for the crew for escape, for launch or landing. The descent module, same as the landing module, just everything all in one place. Leonov himself uses an experimental spacesuit that he hadn't tried before. So this is reckless stuff. They cut every conceivable corner. And let's focus in on what happened. Let's really focus in on that inflatable airlock. All right, remember, this is vacuum tube technology in the Voskhod 2. You cannot open the door. So they have to have this crazy thing they have to put in place, inflate it with air, and Leonov has to go out through this thing and then out into space. Now, he's in space for 12 minutes. They were 12 harrowing, scary minutes. He gets out there, they don't have much time before the dark side of the Earth comes around, and there's a problem right away because his spacesuit just expands because of just the atmospheric difference. He's just in this huge spacesuit. So when he needs to go back and they're yelling at him, get back in, he can't get back in. He's too big. So he's a smart guy. He's an adventurous guy. He starts leaking oxygen from his spacesuit to make himself smaller to get in. Of course, this gives him decompression sickness, by the way. Now, he manages to wedge himself in back into this thing, but he goes in head first, which is entirely wrong. So now he's got to maneuver. He's got to turn around before they can close it out. He is freaking out. His heart rate's up. He's sweating so much that he's filled over the line of his boots with sweat. He's sloshing around in his own sweat. He barely makes it back in time. And then to make matters worse, the Voskhod 2 has problems with re-entry, has an emergency landing, barely making it in the Ural Mountains. The astronauts survive, and they are stranded in sub-zero temperatures for nearly 2 days awaiting rescue. Ugh. Yikes. It's a total miracle that Voskhod 2 didn't end in complete death and disaster, right? It's a pretty shocking story. You really, I can't even get close to telling you all about it here right now. Google it. It is an amazing story, really amazing. Now, further Voskhod missions were canceled immediately. They were deemed too risky and too dangerous. For the Soviets, that is saying something. The comparison is real with us. Are you feeling it? I mean, before you think it's going to be unfair for me to say modern software development is a lot like this, let's consider our track record. It's amazing and life-changing as all the stuff we do has been. The software industry isn't exactly known for rigorous, error-free products, is it? No. Decades into the information revolution, digital products still ship with swarms of bugs and substantial user experience flaws. Somehow, some way, we've totally gotten to expect this and to tolerate it. So much so, we've given it a name, minimum viable product, MVP, right? This rules the day. Now, I'm gonna be really fair. MVP is actually a super good thing. Real artists, real engineers ship, after all, right? I mean, it's a response to an industry-wide epidemic of overwrought solutions, expansive processes, individualized resources, delay culture. This needed to happen. Build in digestible chunks, streamline processes, collaborate, release, incrementally do things, evolve. This is good. It's not bad, right? Survival of the products that fit best right now. But the pendulum swings both ways. We have so much faith in the new model, we're failing to ask what we have lost, because even though we're deep into this sense of minimum viable releases, digital products are still shipping with errors, lots of them last time I looked. Those rampant user experience problems, still there. I mean, I guess, you know, not everyone today is using their beautiful 2019 or 2020 folding phone. We're basically back where we started. We just changed the way we got there. And the real problem I have with it is the MVP is all about the promise of refinement and evolution. Things will get better. But in our experience as UX professionals, most MVP products ship, but are rarely adjusted later. Most groups just move on to the next MVP. We've got to make better user experiences. We got to make more error-free, easier to use, responsive, courteous, convenient digital products. Right? Now, the promise of making those things is well worth the trouble of hitting schedule a little bit. And you want to know how I know that? I'll look to Gemini 4. 3 short months after that disastrous near-death experience of Voskhod 2, the Americans sent up Gemini 4. Now, Gemini technology, roundly superior in every way to the Voskhod technology. Far, far safer, right? Ed White, he spends 20 minutes outside of the spacecraft. He has to be ordered to come back in. He doesn't want to do it. And as he reluctantly goes back to the ship, opens the door to go back in, right? Of course, he looks back and says, this is the saddest moment of my entire life, that I have to come in from space. This is a very different story from the Leonev spacewalk, right? Soviet reckless abandon pushed them to first, to get there first. The Americans were moving quickly too. They're pouring resources into space, but moved just a little bit more deliberately, just a little. And the end result was qualitatively better, qualitatively better. Okay, next. Got another interesting story for you. Something I call the Korolev effect. One person being too important to what we're doing. I want you to meet the integral former Red Army colonel. He became the chief designer of the Soviet space program. This is Sergei Korolev. Now, he was thrown into the gulag by Stalin, just like all the other scientists were. But Korolev was released because Korolev knew rockets. He knew rockets. And he became the driving force for rocket technology in the Soviet Union and then the Soviet space program. He was the man, the man. He does everything for this new space program, which he leads absolutely relentlessly. He's the guy who convinces Khrushchev that we've got to go into space, that it's going to be great for the military, it's going to be amazing for propaganda, it's going to be a big deal. He makes it happen. And Korolev shows us something really important. One person can totally change history. He was essential to the Soviet space program. He led everything. He led goals, planning, designs, missions, process, technology growth. If something happened in the Soviet space program, it was Korolev who made it happen. And that's that. He was an amazing person, right? There's no doubt about it. But long about 1966, something happens. Korolev dies, totally unexpectedly, at the height of the space race. And the Soviet space program, already barely keeping ahead of the Americans at this point, was never the same again. Now, without Korolev, the Soviet space program was thrown into disarray. There's a power vacuum, everyone trying to be the next Korolev. And program efforts became even more reckless, if that's even possible. The first post-Korolev launch was the Soyuz 1, right? Despite over 200 documented design and engineering faults, it launches anyway. It immediately encounters a series of failures, and then it leads to a rather ignominious first for the Soviet Union, the first fatality, in-flight space fatality. When one man's pivotal to an entire program, that program is fundamentally flawed. And ouch, this really felt familiar to me. Our industry is totally, strongly personality driven. We're not alone in this, certainly, right? But it's kind of like, it's like a feature, not a bug for us. We have superstar developers. What happens when they get hit by lightning? How much of our success is built on specific individuals? You know, we have teams are dependent on superstars. We have projects that have people that have so much domain knowledge that if they were to go away, we'd be thrown into disarray. We see this happen all the time, all the time. And you even think of leaders, right? Highly motivated political players can squash things in one fell swoop. We're incredibly dominated by this in our industry. And so we have to do better here as well. I mean, we have to invest in ops, right, in teams and processes that can outlive us. And this is where the rubber hits the road and why a conference like this is so deeply important. We need the processes to outlive us. But I don't see enough of it, even though we talk a lot about it. One more thing. The Soviet Union really cared deeply about how they presented themselves to the world, as does any country, obviously, but the Soviets were particularly good at this. Let's talk about Pravda. Now, Pravda was essentially the main Soviet propaganda newspaper, and this is its masthead. It was a propaganda vehicle for the party. Pravda simply means truth, that's all. Now, let's think about truth. Truth is an interesting concept. And in terms of the Soviet Union, it was very, very, very malleable. So let's think about the Zond 5 fiasco. That did not go well. Zond 5 was essentially a last gasp effort to get a first in a space race that had already been lost. But Zond 5 occurs, and the Soviet Union proclaims it as a massive, massive victory, a glorious thing that has occurred. It's a major propaganda win in their view, and this is a wonderfully beautiful commemorative stamp they put out. But look at the date on the stamp. They get this stamp out in 1969. The stamp in 1969. What else was happening in 1969? Oh yeah, humans were walking on the surface of the moon in 1969. So when it comes to space propaganda, the Soviets were truly amazing. And we're going to look at a lot of their artwork here, which is incredibly wonderful, right? And they're driving their population to see the importance and depth of greatness that they're bringing to bear through all of these amazing firsts. And they are truly deeply committed to it. This is only the smallest sampling of the wonderful work that proclaims all these amazing people who pushed us out into space first. The idea was that it was an inevitable victory, and it was an inevitable bit of evidence that the Soviet system was greater. Now, that's what all propaganda does, right? I mean, it's trying to drive reality. You say you're better, you're driving this through force of will, you're motivating, you're manipulating your population to remain committed to everything. It's a form of control, right? Simply put. Now, in the sense of the Soviets, that control was altered, not just what they said, but what they did. So truth was only tangentially related to the announcements that were made. Timelines that were created for the Soviet space program were artificially attached to important party anniversaries or US space progress. Fear of the competition, right? Announcements were made that reinforced the underlying system. Political concerns and the concerns of the message completely overwhelmed technology, safety, schedule, and people. No doubt about that. And quality was not the major concern of the program or the propaganda surrounding it. So I get a little bit of chills when I think about that, because I see this so much in all the work we do all the time. Propaganda is not the exclusive province of countries, let alone the Soviet Union, long gone. But plenty of organizations play in this nefarious sandbox. Product launch decisions timed to competitors, trade shows, or other artificial timelines. Announcements are made in order to procure sales, deals, to placate investors. Ever heard an exaggerated claim about incremental progress? Sure you have. Ever feel like a product's been overpromised without consulting you much at all? You ever hear that? We're awash in propaganda in our own work. But just like with countries or with the Soviet Union, it's veneer. It's not the thing that's driving excellence at all. Okay, so let's pause, take a deep breath. There's so much more we can talk about, but let's stop and think of some of these lessons I want to leave you with. Because engineers pushed us out into space. The lessons they learned, the processes they created are with us still. They help us understand how to make software, apps, sites, advanced functionality. We do need to listen. But what I'm after today is understanding of different philosophies. You know, how you conceive of your mission determines what you make, how you make it, how you sell it, right? How you move forward. Your starting point matters. A different starting point will yield different results. If you just want to get to the next release and be first, you can totally do that. If you want to build quality digital products that will last, you can do that too. So how do we grasp something from this story? You know, the Soviet space program achieved a great deal. I mean, it's amazing accomplishments. But its corner-cutting approach shows us how things can go completely astray. They, after all, did not hit their main goal. So it's up to us to avoid these mistakes, to invest in deliberate quality, particularly user experience, of course. Build processes that truly outlive us, independent of superstars, and avoid artificial meaning. These are things that we can do. And I assure you, you're almost always doing better than you think at stuff like this, at creating great digital products, right? The Americans were paranoid about the Soviet Union right up until the moon landing. But the race wasn't a sprint, as the Soviets felt it was. It was a marathon. It was a marathon. By the Zond 5, the United States had long surpassed the Soviet Union. And it did it with a unified effort, a methodology that was careful. It did it with measured speed. So I want us as an industry to look to NASA and how it did things, because we can learn a lot of great stuff from how NASA worked. You think it's impossible to hit aggressive development deadlines while simultaneously creating, you know, super high quality user-loved products? Is that impossible? We put a human on the moon. We really did it. It wasn't perfect. We had to move fast. We had to invent things along the way, figure out reliable solutions to completely new problems every day. NASA in particular did this with professional excellence and marked attention to safety. In so doing, NASA beat this hyper-kinetic, hyper-competitive, less careful, rushing Soviet space program to the punch. It wasn't an impossible thing. It was just an extraordinary thing. And as development teams, as design and development teams, we can look to this example and deliver, and we can deliver well, even if it takes just a little bit more effort to get the big quality out. We can absolutely do that. And I know you can. So that is it. I want to thank you so much for hearing me out. This is me. You can find me online anytime you want to talk about this more, especially if you're a crazy space nerd like me. So thank you so much for listening. I think we've got a minute or two, but done.
Thank you, Dean. Absolutely
you.
Fantastic. And I think that the slides were absolutely stunning. I mean, all the Soviet kind of stuff that you were showing, absolutely nostalgic indeed. I have a couple of questions from the chat. I think that this is the most important and probably the most difficult that you ever have to answer in any conference whatsoever. This is from James Ang. There is an interesting artifact in the corner of the room. Can't seem to get my eyes off it. What do you got over there?
That is a sculpture that my daughter made. She's a sculptor, and it is a. I don't know what it is.
All right.
Is the answer. It is a steel sculpture that is a insectoid. I think it's modeled after the curvature of her spine. I don't know. I just love it.
Okay, wonderful, wonderful indeed. Couple of short comments here. So Thomas Bosch said that if anyone has read the Phoenix Project, Brent is the Korolev of that book. And also people are saying that they know quite a few Brents themselves, so which is a good thing. But the Chilovan Best is asking, what did the Americans do that the quality of their space tech was so much better?
They simply moved at a slightly slower pace. They could have gone faster, but they decided, for instance, the Americans could have gotten a person to walk in space faster if they had cut the same corners that the Soviets did, but they were completely committed to the Mercury capsule, which they felt was just a ton safer. And really 3 months in the big scheme of things wasn't a big deal. So they were really just slightly slower and made things safer. Even though but the Americans had tragedies as well. It wasn't as if even the pursuit of safety didn't lead to death on the American side. It was more an overall theme. We're not going to be reckless. I mean, to be really honest, it's a miracle that the United States wasn't first to do the spacewalk. I still to this day can't believe Leonov even lived.
All right. Janne, you want to conclude the session for?
Well, yes. First of all, thanks, Dean, from my part as well. It was really wonderful, and the parallels between Soviet space program and we doing UX design in 2021 gives me like chills.
I know. It's a little uncomfortable, I admit.
Yes. But really kind of thought-provoking stuff, and gives us a lot to think about. So thank you, Dean.